Hi,
Hi,
Gita.
Hi, Jessica.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I see that participants are still joining on the link, but I'd love to get started so that, yeah, we can, and people can join as they do. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Kim Whitaker, and along with Asanda, I am there we go, there she is. Along with Asanda, we are the co-founders of Kwela Women, and it was co-founded in 2018. At Kwela, we believe in the power of women to change communities. Collaboration is also one of our core values, and so today we really wanted to bring together other NPOs in our inaugural NPO Grow event. The idea is to connect with each other, to find inspiration, to find hope, to share resources and ideas so that we can build on each other's successes. And during 2020, we've seen the landscape change so much, from a funding landscape, from a philanthropy landscape. We personally, during 2020, started a project within Kwela called Ubuntu Beds, where we sort of pivoted and used our resources to provide healthcare workers with accommodation. And we could not have done that without our funders, without community partners, without volunteers. And so we wanted to share a bit of these learnings with you today. So I think a word that has come up recently a lot is donor fatigue, and the fact that the old ways of funding have changed, and the landscape has changed, and perhaps philanthropy has changed. So today I'm joined by Jessica Spira, who is the sector head of healthcare and hospitality at the Rand Merchant Bank. And she was instrumental in setting up the First Rand SPIRE, which stands for SA Pandemic Intervention and Relief Effort Fund. This was a fund of over 100 million towards COVID relief, and this was during 2020. Jessica also served as an advisor to the Solidarity Fund, as well as many other boards. So we're really happy to have you here today, Jess. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Gita Amber Carroll is an experienced social impact innovation strategist and consultant. She started a niche consulting business and is now also bridging many sectors, primarily peace and environmental sustainability. So welcome, Gita.
Thank you, Kim. Hi.
Awesome. So I wanted to get the ball rolling and chat to Jess a little bit first about the Spire Fund, to set the context of how corporate business or big business reacted to the pandemic and shifted perspectives really on funding. So why was it started? What was the goal? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Thanks, Kim, and hi, everyone. So, you know, I think we'll all think back to the last 2 weeks of March as almost like that seminal moment where, you know, you can actually talk to your children one day and say, you know, this is where I was when, you know, the lockdown started. Kind of like when, you know, the planes went into the World Trade Center. Everyone can kind of remember where they were when that happened. And but yeah, I think most people kind of can really remember those few weeks, you know, when things was really getting a bit stressful globally, and what they were doing in terms of either, you know, making a decision, you know, at the end of March, you know, in terms of working from home and how are we going to, you know, work with our, you know, business going forward. And, you know, it's a bit of panic all over the place. But I think what happened from a First Rand perspective is that we realized that there was going to be a lot of demands placed on the banks in terms of reacting responsibly with respect to our clients and with respect to the society in which we operate at the end of March. And, you know, a lot of the banks were kind of getting together and seeing, you know, how we can support our clients through that. First Rand said at a First Rand Exco level, there was a decision made that we wanted to go a little bit beyond just regular banking solutions for our clients and for society over, you know, what we could see being, you know, kind of a very stressful time from a COVID pandemic perspective. And we decided at that point really to actually form the SPIRE Fund, which you got correct, Kim, well done. The South African Pandemic Intervention and Relief Effort is actually what SPIRE stands for, a bit of a mouthful, so we'll keep it at SPIRE. And it was registered PBO, so we kind of got that done very quickly. Luckily, we've got quite a few governance structures within First Rand that we could set that up quite simply. But ultimately, it was funded by First Rand foundations and by FNB and RMB, which are kind of operating entities initially. And the idea was that it was 100 million Rand, which was going to be spent largely on supporting the public healthcare sector in gearing up for the COVID pandemic and various other things as well. But we knew definitely we wanted to focus on health at the time. And then we realized, and then shortly after we added 2 further pillars, which was food and old age care homes. So under those 3 pillars is really where we've placed most of our focus as SPIRE in terms of why, where we wanted to focus our attention. But I think it's important also to realize that the SPIRE Fund wasn't set up only from a monetary perspective, and it actually relied on a number of volunteers from across the First Rand group, which we assembled with quite a lot of ease. Actually, people were amazingly willing and able and enthusiastic to volunteer their help where they could. And a lot of what we're doing under the SPIRE initiative is not only about donating money to a cause, but rather actually using a lot of the skills that we have within our teams to help with things like project management or procurement, and also really also drawing a lot on our networks as First Rand. So these are really what makes up SPIRE. It's not just a fund that imparts with donor funding.
Thank you. And I mean, just to kind of tie into that, how that relates to us, I think it was 4th of April, maybe 3 days after launching Ubuntu Beds. I remember I just set up my email address, like kim@ubuntubeds.org. It was quite exciting, had like 3 emails. And then my 4th email was from Jefferson, who was like, hi, we've got this fund, we want to help you, to place healthcare workers. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like, we are on day 4. And this man, like, first of all, I thought it was spam. I looked him up on the internet to see whether he wasn't trying to spam me. And then he'd heard my interview on Cape Talk, and I thought it was a really proactive approach to donor funding. And I think that our experience with your team has been very much, I mean, we've worked with teams from across FNB to, through to RMB, on everything from suppliers, I'm trying to think, like supplier negotiation, getting the best, where I'll walk in and then big business will come in and say, no, we can get a better price here. Let me go negotiate for you. And it was a very interesting sort of look at a big brother kind of donor relationship, I think, which can be quite beneficial. I certainly felt like we were on the same team the whole time. So, I mean, we have one Slack channel where you must be bombarded with our constant and, with our constant ongoings for Ubuntu Beds, but it really felt like we were sort of one team doing that together. So, I mean, I know that you were working with a number of other organizations. So how do you choose to work with certain organizations, and why do you choose to not work with others?
So, because we set up a fund and it had to have full governance, and it was really, run by a bunch of bankers who, do this as their regular day job. We really quite quickly made sure that the governance structures for the SPIRE Fund were put into place quite early. And we had a steerco, which was actually set up with very senior people from the bank. And the steerco initially, right from the end of March, was meeting twice a week and ad hoc if necessary. And, we were really getting kind of bombarded with kind of opportunities, or at least, kind of ideas as to who, what way we could, allocate funding. So especially in those early days, there was obviously a lot of unknowns. So we didn't know, we knew that there was definitely a need for PPE. We knew that there was going to be a need for ventilators. Or at that stage, everyone thought that the ventilators was the main thing that we needed the help with. but then, you know, there was a bunch of other requests that were coming through to us for assistance. So the SPIRE SteerCo was really there to create that governance structure to evaluate which projects we were going to support and which ones we weren't. And you know, we did proper, well, probably a light due diligence, I would say, given the time frame allowed, DD on who we were going to support. But we definitely had these very specific pillars. So, you know, with respect to the Ubuntu beds, for example, you know, we had a very specific pillar within the healthcare pillar, which was to protect our frontline healthcare workers. And this fell absolutely squarely in there. And it was a, you know, project we were very keen to support because for a number of reasons. One is, you know, we wanted to support our healthcare workers, of course, that was most important, but also we found it was a really great way to support the hospitality sector, which we knew was reeling and unfortunately continues to reel under the lockdowns and shutdowns that have occurred in the industry. So it really, from an Ubuntu events perspective, it was a really symbiotic relationship that worked very well because, you know, we were totally subscribed to what you were trying to achieve. So that wasn't a hard sell from a SPIRE SteerCo perspective, and still continues to be something which we are immensely proud of supporting and continue to support. So you know, that was quite an easy one.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what's also kind of humbling is to remember that our first proposal was rejected by SteerCo, which is, I always think about that and I'm like, okay, that's a good reason to be stubborn. Like, we were so adamant and we just like went back to the drawing board and we kind of reworked it and like refined and then I remember you and Jefferson went back and you were like, no, we've got to, like, here's something, we've got a new angle, we need to rethink this. And I just remember that phone call being really, really exciting when you said, we've got some funding for you, yay. But it wasn't a bullseye straight away. It was a few weeks. It was a bit of a back and forth, and there was like the first rejection. So, and I think that it's quite easy to give up at that first rejection and go, okay, well, you know, maybe it's not meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there were lots of proposals that were rejected, and I do think that it was well scrutinized as to how we wanted to spend our funding, and still is. I mean, you know, there's some projects that I think were very valid that didn't get the funding because they weren't within mandate, and I think mandate is really important, right? I mean, I think you know, it's important to understand the mandate of the donor so that you can actually you know, speak to their language and make sure that you are aligned with them, because that, if you're aligned with the donor, then at least you know, you're speaking the same language and getting them on your side.
Absolutely. So I hear you say mandates, specific pillars, which sort of reminds me a bit of values. You know, what are the values of that organization, what they're trying to achieve, and do they align with your values? And I think this might be a really great time to ask Gita a little bit more about your experience around sort of aligning the values of a donor or funder to the values of an NPO. Oh, bumper sticker for 2020, you're on mute.
Jessica, as you're speaking, I'm almost thinking, if only we could have this conversation in March. But I know you didn't have the answers then, and I know all of this wouldn't have happened. But from a nonprofit perspective, when COVID hits and everything from, you know, people dying, hospitals, schools can't run, sports projects can't run, or conservation programs can't run. And then hearing there's a solidarity fund and all, there are funds or they're not funds, and businesses closing down. So just in a sense of trying to figure out what to focus on and what to do. So it's almost like this conversation would have been beautiful then, but I know that you didn't have this conversation ready then. So it's just so fascinating from a nonprofit perspective that firstly hearing that even for the first time in decades, that the for-profit or the corporate sector was negotiating and going through processes and systems to get on the ground and get to working with people and get to understand what the needs are. So that is absolutely, I think, one of the main things that COVID has kind of brought to fruition with all of us. And when Jessica just mentioned now again, what the nonprofit world definitely realized is, as a nonprofit themselves or working with the donor, that it's not just a fund, it's not just a grant, or it's not just getting the funds in. So people, whoever you receive your funding from at this stage would be a funder plus model, or potential services and maybe a financial grant. So that was a huge learning within COVID, seeing with how donors were engaging. And I think a lot of smaller nonprofits had this huge stress, and they were like, but now we're feeding, but that's not been approved by any of our grants or our funders. They've approved IT, or they've approved tertiary education, or they've improved financial support, and now we're feeding. Are we going to get in trouble from our donor? And a lot of the times, nonprofits lost donors because there was pressure on the from where that money came from, or there was beautiful relationships created between a nonprofit and a donor, because it forged these really authentic relationships between the nonprofits and the for-profit. And for the first time, I think it wasn't about which sector are you in or what side do you work on from a tax perspective. It was, there's a need, there's a problem, how do we get there, and how do we engage and solve that. So it wasn't I'm a charity and I'm a corporate, or I'm a for-profit or non-profit. It was, these kids need food, or these people need transport, or these people need assistance. So that was a huge kind of emergence on both from the nonprofit perspective, but I think the nonprofit saw more into the for-profit side for the first time.
I think an exercise which has really helped us, you bring up so many great points, and an exercise that really helped us is that we stopped kind of focusing so much on what we do, but more on why we do it. And when that core of why we do things, not exactly what we do, is realized, then the what we do can actually be applied into many different formats. So I remember speaking to our lawyer in 27th of March, and I was like, we want to launch Ubuntu Beds. It took us 18 months. It took us like 12 months to register as an NPC. It took us 18 months to register as a PBO. Like, there's just not enough time. And SIPC's closed. What do we do? And he said, well, just make it an initiative of Kwela. And I was like, but is it in line with what we say? And he said, just separate it, create a separate bank account, create a separate initiative, and earmark that. And so I think the people, in order to fulfill their purpose, just did what they had to. I mean, when you see people, as you say, going from technology to delivering food, if their purpose is to uplift communities or to help social change, then that's what's needed right then and there. We spoke earlier about sort of values and aligning the values of the funder to the nonprofit, and you get that really beautiful example of the beach cleanup. Do you want to chat to me a little more about that?
So I think because if there are nonprofits on the call, and specifically what the donor landscape would look like if you busy forecasting for 2021, a fact that we have to realize is that from a corporate CSI perspective, a percentage of your tax avoidance would usually filter into the nonprofit sector. Again, it's various themes. So many nonprofits could be lucky or fortunate that they have been forecasted in with the current CSI budget for 2021, and that they're working with a corporate that hasn't been that hard hit from a profit perspective. But the reality is that what we're facing from an economic perspective, locally, definitely and internationally, is that bargaining on a CSI investment for 2022 onwards will be very different, purely because it's a percentage of tax money on profits being made. So if a simple example, if companies are making profits, then there's less of CSI funding to be spent. So with that saying, on the one side, even in the grant funding perspective, a scene where you might have received grants for youth empowerment or game conservation or IT, a lot of the grants, and especially with the Solidarity Fund, for example, would be towards primary needs. So it would be health, it would be COVID-19 specific, or it would be primary education access to that. So anticipating that there will be an adjustment to the grant requirements. That doesn't mean if you do sport or if you do tertiary education that you are not linked to a primary objective. So it would just be clever kind of linking yourself to that. So a beach cleanup, the example that Kim is referring to would be, for an example, if you kind of working with a corporate, but more than just the CSI. So within a certain corporate, there is a huge trend, I'm sure you know, within employee volunteerism. So an awesome shift over the last few years, and definitely now, is that there's business with purpose, and businesses want to be more ethically. They want to look at their staff, and they want to. So that includes sharing your offering with the business more than just wanting a check from them. So a beach cleanup example would be is that if you a beach cleanup nonprofit, that you include corporate activities on the beach. So have the staff engaged, teach them about. So then as a beach cleanup organization, you are educating the public about the do's and the don'ts with regards to it. So you are working within your impact, as well as giving the corporate a day on the beach, a purposeful kind of go to. So, but there's many different examples, and I think what nonprofits don't do, because they are they're so full out, they're so on the ground, they've got so much on their desks, is that they don't actually listen to a potential donor. They don't actually allow themselves, because a donor sometimes tells you a lot of things that they might be looking into, but you are maybe so stressed out that you just need 50,000 Rand or 500,000 Rand to do X, Y, Z. And if that donor doesn't fit that, then you kind of, but that's not the right fit. So within a kind of the more employee volunteerism or skill sharing or support, I think that leads toward the nonprofit actually getting into a space where they listen to potential donors. And how do we move from just wanting funding, but how do we offer more, and how do we work with the donor and not just the old traditional way of there is a CSI check or a grant?
Absolutely. And you spoke of the beach co-op. I think that was a really great example of someone who collaborated with a donor or funder. That was a project you worked on? Yeah,
well, there's many, and I mean, there's a beautiful. I think there might be some Laureate Sport for Good staff members listening, and they've got an exceptionally beautiful partnership with Mercedes-Benz. And I think in the best practice of corporate nonprofit relationships would be that, because it's not just a check receiving relationship from both sides. So Mercedes-Benz would benefit hugely from a Laureate Sport for Good, and a Laureate Sport for Good would benefit hugely from Mercedes-Benz more than just the check. And the same as the beach co-op and smaller nonprofits and larger nonprofits.
Absolutely. And so what was interesting, when we were at, Asanda and I were in the Netherlands last year at the Booking.com head office, and we've got a very good relationship with them. And what's interesting was that their CSI actually falls under HR and not under marketing. So when you can barely find their funds online. It's not something that they market externally. It's mainly internal. So, I mean, we had like a film crew out here filming the whole thing, filming our graduation. And it was all for internal purposes. Why? Because they have 18,500 employees around the world, and it's important for them to grow employee buy-in. So it's not about getting more people to stay in hotel beds. And their fund is quite sizable. It's about 5 million euros a year, and they've got about over 100 alumni. So it's quite a big program, and yet it's kind of under the scenes, behind the scenes. So so that was a revelation for me. I always assumed that a CSI was something that corporates would sort of spend money on in order to grow sales, but there are sometimes different benefits. And in the case with First Rand as well, our experience was that the staff were all getting involved, whether it's like, you know, F&B tech specialists that were helping us with how to manage our database, to a procurement specialist or whatnot. Jess, you're back. Yay. Can you hear us?
I'm back on voice only. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're sounding great.
Excellent. Sorry. Well, maybe it's not the worst thing that you can't see me. So, but you saw me a little bit. So hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah. No. Absolutely.
Sorry, I missed your answers, Gita. Zoom just decided to stop working on my iPad, so I don't know why. I have no idea. Sorry.
No worries. For
Anyway.
Those who want, we are also recording, so we're going to share that around with everyone afterwards. Yeah, so we've spoken a little bit about you know, the specific pillars, the mandates, the values of different types of funding, about aligning with a donor. Jess, you talked about due diligence. Is anything there that you think is worth mentioning? Because in my experience, it is actually sometimes quite underrated, and having the paperwork there is so important. But it's quite difficult to know exactly what paperwork you need, actually. Do you want to talk to that, or Gita as well? You're welcome to sort of talk to that.
Yeah, Jess, will come.
I think sorry, I think I think like any pitch, you know, and I think the interesting part is, you know, I guess we're always selling, even if we're in the CSI space. I mean, you know, any pitch that you make for money, whether it's in the form of donations, or in the form of investment, or in the form of debt funding, or whatever it is that you're looking to really attract. I mean, I think that the art of pitching is actually a very important aspect to your success. And that goes without saying, even in the donation or in the CSI space or the PBO space. So, you know, it's like any pitch. I think the knowing your audience, knowing what's important to them, understanding what the you know, what their objectives are, is absolutely critical. And then, yes, you know, making sure that they've got all the paperwork that they need, or all the motivation that they need in order to support your pitch. Because, you know, if you make it easier for them, it makes it easier to get it across the line. You know, I think the difficult part during COVID was just the sort of time and the urgency of getting funding in as quickly as possible. But so it wasn't always that easy to get the paperwork done, and that's maybe not so easy to get the strategy right. So when you talked earlier about, you know, having to go back a couple of times to the SPIRE code to get funding for Ubuntu beds, I think it was because, you know, we needed to actually kind of work out exactly how to pitch it. So it's really, I think, centered a lot around that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I know that in our pitches, I always include, like, this is the money we need, but if you can't give us the money, this is the resources we need. So for example, Asanda and I have both benefited from one-on-one coaching and mentoring from people from all over the world, because we say, if you can't give us money, that's fine. Can you please mentor me on how to do a pitch, or how to refine the business model? And certainly with First Rand, I feel that you know, Jefferson, yourself, I mean, you helped us build that strategy document, and you helped us build out that strategy and put us in touch with the technology that stitched it all together. So it sometimes can actually be so much more than just the funding. Access to networks, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think one should underestimate the value of donated time. So, you know, you talked a bit earlier. I mean, I think that one of the most amazing experiences for me through this time was to witness how just certain individuals stepped up to the plate. It was almost like, you know, there were two kind of groups of people. Like, there were some that were watching Netflix and baking bread through lockdown, and then there were others who really kind of stepped up and said, okay, there was more to be done here, you know. And I think I'd like to bring up actually an example of an area where it's not necessarily a PBO, but where there was an immense amount of value from the donated time from people. And that was the Business for South Africa work group. I'm not sure if you know about it, but it was set up also, kind of in those crazy weeks of the end of March, and sort of headed up and spearheaded and brainchilded by Stavros Nicolau from Aspen and Martin Kingston from Rothschild. And really they just set up, they said the business has to come together as a collective to try and help in this pandemic. And what happened then, it was almost like nails to a magnet. People just sort of like joined to help where they could. I mean, I guess they drew on their own networks. I mean, Stavros reached out to me as well. And, we had the really fantastically senior people from a number of organizations coming together to donate really their time and their expertise. It was, there were even competitor companies that were working together, like the pharma companies were all there, consulting and accounting firms were all there, competing groups that were really joining this group to really club together, get over the egos and really work towards a greater purpose. And that value that was created just from the donation of time and resources, is something that really has real value. And then also you talked about the network as well, Kim. I mean, I think that's also less measurable, but definitely hugely valuable. One of the things that we did at Spire is we drew on our network of clients across the group. So we drew on our network of clients who were in the PPE supply space to help source PPE. So, it was we kind of asked the F&B commercial team to delve into all of their client base to see who actually had access to PPE or knew how to get it. And that was really a feeder into that B4SA PPE procurement work group. And then another example that was quite cool was that we've been working and still continue to work with the Steve Biko Academic Hospital in Tshwane. And they called one day and said, well, we don't have any Wi-Fi connectivity and our patients can't have visitors, because of the COVID wards. And now they can't even phone their loved ones. So, can't we help with some Wi-Fi? So I called a client of mine in the fiber sector in dark fiber Africa and I asked if they could help. And they were happy to help. And then they basically connected the Steve Biko Academic Hospital and the Tshwane District Hospital, which are both in Tshwane. And that was quite quick. And so then we were able to at least deliver that sort of solution for them, which was really great. So just a demonstration of the power of the network.
Absolutely, totally. And Gita?
From a due diligence and governance perspective, there was literally before COVID, because January, February was the beginning of 2020. And within our clients being mainly nonprofit clients, the whole thing was governance and child protection policies and strategies and board governance and a theory of change and log frameworks. That it was a big focus because you can't receive institutional global grants without those. And then when COVID hits, that didn't matter. Like no one asked, the initial stages. And that to me was a beautiful enlightening view into why it is and what we're doing and why are we here. So from a person that works in governance and preaches due diligence, I must say that was a beautiful, it was beautiful to see, and it was happening. So yes, on the side, your house needs to be in order, but there's a halfway. Like if you need to do what you got to do to get going on the ground, and if you really shine in what you're doing and it is the right need, then like Jessica said in your pitch, it comes through. But yes, because you're working with other people's money and investments, like in a business, you do need to have your house in orders, and a kind of a similar thing within almost counteracting what I'm saying now is that one of these the CAN networks were created as a kind of which was absolutely beautiful because people were setting up governance or setting up structures as CAN was unfolding, and people were coming, neighbors were helping, and it was just a beautiful, people were coming alive to support. But again, unfortunately, if you don't have a strategy and maybe understand your scalability and what is the succession of it if the founder leaves, then how would the cans be funded if the COVID mania stops, which has been the case of many cans. So there's another learning in the sense of if you start your business, you have a 10-year plan for your business. You have a succession plan when you ask for investment. And with a non-profit, it should be exactly the same. So a can would be an example of, yes, we're servicing the need, but have we really thought this through? And I know you can't scrutinize can because it had to happen, but that's an example of many non-profits coming to fruition, but they haven't actually literally thought the whole plan through. And that's where governance and due diligence come in. And for me, it's not all governance and no governance. For me, it's somewhere in between, and constantly having to double both those structures and hearts with regards to diligence and governance.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I agree with you, Gita. I mean, I think that those can initiatives were amazing, and I think that the immediacy of it and the way that people were, kind of stepping up to the plate and really kind of drawing on the, communities or on a micro basis was really amazing. I think that it was also a very palpable shift in the way that the SPIRE SteerCo also approached new proposals at some point. It was kind of possibly about sort of July, August, where we kind of were realizing that there was, going to be a peak, and then we were going to come out of the peak, and then we were going to go into a trough, and it wasn't going to go away so quickly. So we kind of could see what was going on in terms of the epidemiological models and things like that. And what happened is it was definitely a shift in the feeling of the SteerCo as to what type of projects we wanted to support, and it needed to have some sort of sustainable advantage going forward. And I think that's also a really important point to get across, and that the sustainability of the solution also needs to be pitched in such a way that people know that there's going to be a long-lasting, legacy created through their donation, so that there's it can last.
And I think that was something that you brought into our second pitch, was like, okay, what is Ubuntu Beds post-COVID? And I remember that August period so much. I think in July, at one stage we placed like R1 million worth of accommodation in 1 week alone. Like that's how high the peak went. I think it was like a few hundred people we placed in a week, and then it just dropped off. And I remember having that conversation, like, oh, it's like I have COVID fatigue, I have donor fatigue, like I'm just hurtful and tired of everything. But and like, when's life going to come back to normal? And everyone sort of had that sense and that feeling. And then suddenly all the projects that demanded so much time and attention and funding, it kind of seemed like that was from yesterday. What are we going to do tomorrow? And so I think it did sort of, there was that lull, that moment when life sort of returned back to normal, and we thought, okay, what is our purpose? And for us, actually doing, again, a purpose workshop was really useful for Ubuntu Beds. We realized our purpose is actually to create safe spaces, so that people can find the strength to face an uncertain tomorrow. Like, that is the reason why we started Ubuntu Beds. And in this particular case, it was to help healthcare workers, because that's the immediate need. But again, in that moment, I hadn't thought about what our purpose, like what were we going to be doing in a year? I don't know, but tomorrow we need to be placing people. And I think in that way, it was good that I had a reason to like lift my head to the horizon. And I remember, Jess, clearly you said, you got to put something in about the long-term vision. And so that for me was very guiding. Interesting, we have a question from Amin with regards to a post-pandemic effort from the SPIRE. So the question here was, will it also consider post-pandemic efforts in building back better, building back better, such as driving women's participation in traditionally male-dominated sectors, such as transport, to drive their financial mobility. So I guess, what does SPIRE look like post-pandemic?
So look, it's a good question. I think that SPIRE was set up specifically to deal as a response, as a response effort for COVID. So that's, there were a lot of situations where we've been presented with opportunities to fund initiatives which are not COVID related, and we've had to decline those. So the purpose of SPIRE is absolutely relating to COVID and post-COVID effects. So, it's not necessarily just, kind of an immediacy thing, but also looking long term to make sure that the healthcare sector comes out of the pandemic in better space than what it entered into it. And also to provide relief to people who've been affected by COVID. So although those types of things like women's issues and things like that are absolutely vital for our economy, it's not something that's within the mandate of the SPIRE Fund specifically, which is really a COVID-related fund. And that being said, it doesn't mean that there aren't other efforts within the groups that don't deal with those sorts of initiatives. So, like any large corporate, and obviously First Rand is an extremely large corporate within the context of South Africa, we have a number of CSI initiatives where we are looking at, a variety of causes, and our whole CSI strategy is determined by a team of people which form the F&B philanthropy team. And they, kind of assist in the strategic direction as to how we spend our CSI and what we focus on. And then we do some really unbelievable work across the spectrum. But SPIRE itself is very much pandemic related. And we do think about kind of post-COVID. I think we've still got some runway in terms of, we're not finished COVID yet, unfortunately. So I imagine we're still going to be spending quite a lot of time working on things like vaccine rollouts and things like that, to the extent that we still have capacity within the fund to allocate some funding towards that. But also we're working currently, as an example, with the Solidarity Fund, where they're providing the funding itself and we're providing the expertise to roll out two very large projects, one in Gauteng and one in the Eastern Cape, where we're looking to capacitate the public hospitals with additional equipment, which is partly COVID related, but also relating to kind of just improving the facilities at the hospitals. And that's the Solidarity Fund money. So, but we as SPIRE, in terms of the expertise that we've built up, are able to help with the procurement and the sourcing of a lot of that equipment. So it's been a good partnership with the Solidarity Fund. And that's definitely forward-looking and might not be only COVID-related, but it's still really mainly within the mandate of the SPIRE Fund.
Yeah, and that's where it's so interesting.
Quite
I mean,
I
love it. I love it that you're crisp and clear about that, right? Like, this is what we are, and everything else we're not, because it makes it easy as an organization to have conversations, or to rather move on to something that is like very specific. So so thank you. I think that's a great answer. I hope that answers the question. So I really want to get into the meat of today's question, which is like, what are your thoughts? And I'll start with Gita. Like, what are your thoughts around new funding models or new ways of working together more sustainably? Like, what does new philanthropy look like?
Yes. So at the beginning, before COVID, when our priorities were slightly different, the Good Machine, and we had a partnership with the Red and Yellow School of Creative Business, or they used to be known as School of Magic and Logic. But they're pretty much, they're honor students, they're marketing and communication students, which are students that have a degree in either, it could be ecology, it could be fashion, it could be communication, and are currently doing a postgraduate in marketing communication. So we were very fortunate that they took the Good Machine as a brand, as a business study, because there was a shift in social impact and conscious business. So from the Good Machine, we used that study to get insight into young people, in the sense their thinking and their relation to charity and cause marketing, which is a buzzword at the moment. And 90% of the participants in the class either had their own charity in the sense of a thrift or a secondhand, or involved with some form of animal shelter, which is significantly different if you had to ask the Red and Yellow School of Advertising 20 years ago if they were involved with charity. So the charity concept initially started with, in the sense, the Queen, who had the concept of charity. So charity, the old philanthropy, was almost for the wealthy who had money to give to the poor. And more now, especially through COVID, we're seeing that charity is not just for the other people. We all were affected, and we all kind of in charity, and that's why the word charity is obviously not the correct term for in need or the various issues. So directly to your answer, and the future of it, the different business models, is that we categorically found that the modern donor is fickle. And fickle means that they're not loyal to just a WWF. They could do WWF today, and then they could do SPCA next week. They're not necessarily as loyal as we call the silent generation, which is your philanthropic kind of the traditional wooden desk who writes a check to a charity. So that does, in a sense, make a lot of work for the nonprofits, because it could be smaller funding in a sense of grant funding and relevance. And for an example, as I said to Kim, it's Black Friday on Friday. Are you, from your perspective in your nonprofit, is there an opportunity for you? Do you have something that you could, it's going to be a viral campaign? Is that relate to your nonprofit? So that's a very different way that you engage with your people than traditionally. So already, like I said, the corporate CSI will look different over the next decade. I'm not too sure about RMB or First Rand, but maybe in a lot of other CSI. And then, so you would have to be quite dynamic and quite specific. And there is this rise of, obviously, as we know, there's a startup, and startups want to be purposeful and meaningful and ethically set up. So what does that mean for your nonprofit? Do you directly get involved with the startup from the beginning? So you are their cause-related marketing campaign. So from the beginning, when the startup is set up, you directly link to their end goal, or very clever kind of structured partnerships, which is a very different way of working if your nonprofit has been set up through traditional grant funding and large CSI donations. So again, I'm not one for definitive answers, because it has to, there is no definitive answer, because you'll be making it up, and it has to be scenario focused. But it's definitely, and as Kim, you also mentioned when we chatted, like the people do care, especially the youth. That's why ecotourism is popular. That's why children go on holidays and they want to see turtles, or they want to volunteer internationally. So what does that mean for the work that you are doing? And that your diversified income model would look differently, because you have to make way for all these other kind of income streams within your nonprofit that weren't necessarily there in the past.
Thank you.
So Gita, I mean,
yes.
I think that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I like the way that you talk about the donors being fickle. I mean, I think that there's, I guess, a range of donors, and that's, we have kind of touched on that a little bit already, in terms of people who want to donate their time, people who are large corporate, people who kind of small donors. And I think, I think if there's an ability to be as flexible as possible in terms of attracting donations, I think that's the way, I think, to win as best you can. I mean, it depends on really the ability for you to create that structure around a fund that can accommodate that. So what I don't think we did this intentionally, but it kind of ended up being a very flexible scenario with Spire. Even though it was set up as a PBO, it was funded by First Rand and the empowerment foundations and things like that. The initial objective in terms of fundraising was that we would actually set it up as a fund seed funded by the group, and then we would look to attract corporate funding. And in fact, we actually set up the SPIRE Fund at the same time as the Solidarity Fund was set up. And then we kind of crossed paths and we discussed it with Solidarity Fund, and they said, well, rather give your money to us and then we'll just club together. And we said, no, well, actually we want our own identity, which we did. But we promised that we wouldn't, play in their turf. And their turf, from a Solidarity Fund perspective, was to attract these large corporate donations into the Solidarity Fund, which they did and did very successfully. But what we said, okay, fine, Aspire, we'll just kind of stick to our 100 million that we've got from our First Rand group. And to the extent that there's anyone that doesn't want to or can't or has issues with donating to Solidarity Fund, will be an alternative for them. It so happened actually that we didn't actually manage to raise any large corporate donations from anyone else. So that was not really something that ever happened. But there were a couple of other things that we were able to do, which was actually quite interesting. So the one thing is, because we had this fantastic governance structure that was, kind of had the endorsement of a large bank, we were able to give people comfort that the actual fund was really well set up and well governed. And so there were some instances where we had, let's say, a high net worth family office who wanted to make a donation, in this case of about 100 ventilators, to the KZN Department of Health, and they didn't have the infrastructure to do this, and they were offshore, but ex-South African. And so what they did is they used the SPIRE Fund as a conduit. So they said, okay, well, we'll give you the money for the donations, you effect the whole donation, and but it will just be a directed type of donation through your fund. So from that perspective, we created, it wasn't so much attracting the donation, but just creating an environment for them to actually make their own donation. And we did this on a few occasions. There was another family who wanted to do that for some ICU equipment for Charlotte. And then we also obviously had that ability to get volunteers. So we did that. I guess that's donated time. And then another way that we also attracted funding, which also was actually directly related to Ubuntu beds, is we created the ability for people to donate e-bucks. So, as you know, if you've got an FNB card, you swipe your card, you get e-bucks, and you can spend it on whatever you want to. But in this instance, we created the ability for individuals to actually donate their e-bucks to a cause that interested them. So it started off as a Solidarity Fund, but then we said, okay, well, Solidarity Fund's got more than enough money, so let's rather put it into beds on it. So then we created a button within the app, which is still there actually. So individuals can donate their e-bucks to helping a healthcare worker on the front line with accommodation. And so that was, really almost like a completely different way of fundraising, and that's wasn't really, raising funding for SPIRE, but it was, as a result of a SPIRE intervention. So, those small donations aren't going to be needle moving, but every cent counts. And, it's important that it was a trusted platform, that people felt comfortable that the donation would go where we said it was going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really an example of how tech was donated, right, in order to leverage, and in the end we still saw the benefit, and we're still seeing it now. Another example is we worked with a company called Clickatel, who actually built us a WhatsApp bot, which we've linked to SnapScan. So when you are texting with our WhatsApp bot, one of the options is, do you want to make a donation? And then you click yes, and it takes you straight to SnapScan. And if you have SnapScan, you can do it, or you can donate your e-bucks, or you can donate via EFT. And all these technologies are kind of easy. So as if you're on a whim and you want to quickly donate 50 Rand because you would rather do that than buy a cappuccino or something, it's kind of easy. And all that tech that I have no idea how to do that, but there are really clever people at First Rand and RMB and FNB and Clickatel and all these corporates who donated their time to make these kind of processes a lot simpler. I've kind of been making notes. We're now on like 11 different different ways of getting donor funding, which is really amazing. I think these are some really fantastic ideas. Another one that we've leveraged in the past is skills development. So this is very specifically to Kwela, but what we're doing is actually a mandate for companies that want to upskill internally. And I guess there are a number of different vehicles there as well. But and I guess the other thing with Spire is that with our current tranche of funding, we're using something called a proof of impact model, where basically we've automated a lot of reporting, but we don't get, we don't ask for a lump sum of money up front and then spend it. We sort of raise invoices, like supply the service and then get reimbursed from the fund. So it's a really it's a very transparent way, I think. So Jess, like you mentioned, how the family trusts are using Spire as a conduit. I think similarly, nonprofits can actually be used as a conduit as well to do good for families or organizations. And in our case, what really helped was having our operational funding covered. So for us, we sort of always split it. Like, how much does it cost us to keep the lights on, keep the electricity going, keep our staff, employed? That costs us X amount per year, and we need to make sure that that's covered. And then how much is going straight towards our projects? And once the core funding is covered, basically every single cent can go straight towards the project, which is another thing that we found beneficial to clarify up front. Like our core, in order to keep our business going, we need 1.5 million Rand a year. And then once we have that, we can then use every other Rand that comes in through eBacks or that comes in through SnapScan is not going towards someone's salary, it's actually going straight into the project. And so in the past, we've also pitched to actually completely to segregate those things and have different funding models for each one. So if you buy a bracelet, it's going to go straight towards the project. It won't go towards electricity, for example. Yeah. Great.
So Kim, you also touched on, I think the one thing that's going to hopefully define the donor landscape in some way, or at least in terms of social impact in the next while, is a concept that we actually working with at the moment at R&D, and that's the concept of social impact bonds. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that at all, but really it's a model that's it's outcomes based, where you have private investors who contribute debt capital to fund projects with social goals. And then if the project achieves its social target, the investor gets a return, like an actual return, by actually the government actually paying for the project. So basically what you're doing is you're saying that the investor invests in the social impact project. If the social impact project achieves its goals, then the government will pay for it and the investor will get its money back. But if obviously it doesn't, then they won't. So there is quite a lot of risk for the funder. But that way, it's almost like a public-private partnership where the government is saying that you will, get private sector to DD the project and to make sure that it works, so that I'm comfortable to get the project delivered to me as government and I'll pay for it. But the private sector basically bears the risk of the project implementation. And I think it's obviously something that's a much larger scale than necessarily what we're talking about today, in terms of raising donor funding in pockets and trying to create sort of more community-based or smaller initiatives. But the principle of it is actually really an exciting space to be playing in. And we're actually looking at one in the healthcare space at the moment with the Medical Research Council, which hopefully we'll get off the ground, which will be great.
I think the UCT GSB has a whole sort of department that focuses on social impact bond, and I know that they were responsible for setting up, I think it was about 700 early childhood development centers around the Western Cape. And they're still busy rolling out the project, but certainly I think it is a funding model that is well worth researching. There was a question from Jenny Chadwick asking, do you have any advice on who to contact for funding a wellness center that works with recovery from alcoholism, addiction, and mental illness? What mandate would that fall under? Any suggestions?
I'm not sure. So I'm not sure who, Jenny, who she's what organization's called, but often when if it's a grant funding or CSI funding, you would look at classifying that with your intervention. So what kind of intervention are you using? Is it counseling? Is it sport? Is it with that could kind of guide you under what sector or what grant? But otherwise, it would be health. A lot of the time, the wellness centers and addiction could, if it's, there would be a different funding route, which would be the medical aid option that can be claimed from medical aid, depending on that. But if it's mental illnesses specific, I think fortunately now trauma is kind of being really, really recognized in a lot of especially with post-COVID. And under mental therapy or mental support. And then again, what is your interventions that you use? Because is it faith-based? Is it participation? Is it nature, environment? So environmental education linked to mental therapy or trauma, and then addiction and alcoholism could be health. But it all, again, it's complicated, and that's why your constitution or your mission statement is so important, because all of that sets you up for under what sector you can apply for. So I'm not, that's what I can make out from that paragraph, Jenny.
Jess, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, I think that yeah, it is a tricky one. Not something that I'm aware of any resources that I can direct you to. I'm sorry.
So yeah, but I mean, it does sound like something that would be close to someone's heart. I know that sounds very vague, but if I think of alcoholism and addiction and mental illness, it is, I mean, I think 70% of Americans are struggling with like stress and anxiety at the moment through the pandemic alone. So it is something, mental illness is something that's very widespread. So I guess, yeah, I think looking for maybe even global nonprofits that specialize in that specific niche and are looking to expand their footprint and their impact around the world would be really beneficial. Asanda and I are on a group of, we're on a number of groups, for example, you know, this cohort to that cohort, and whenever there's an opportunity to go for free training, or for example, there's a fantastic learning website called Philanthropy U, where you can do short courses, but then you end up going with different cohort members. And that's often a great way to find out what organizations are doing something similar to me overseas or in a different place, because they might have a mandate to expand into Africa, but they don't have an implementation partner yet. So I can't think of the name right now, but Jenny, maybe I can reach out to you directly afterwards. There's a mental health bot that is working with a company called Turn.io that we're also working with at the moment. And they've got a WhatsApp group of about 200 nonprofits from all over the world who are testing out this WhatsApp bot technology. And one of them is doing mental health in Uganda. So that might be a good start, is to contact them on LinkedIn and to say, you know, this is what I want to do in South Africa. Do you have any learnings? How did you get funded? You know, do you have any advice? And often, in my experience, people are really open to sharing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I see we have another question. Can you give some idea of what government departments are involved in impact bond type of arrangement? Any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, I think, you know, just moving on from the, you know, looking at this social impact fund that we're busy with, I know, I mean, what we're working with now is the Department of Health. I'm not sure which other departments are looking at social impact funds, but I'm sure that there are many. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of these outcomes-based initiatives are often based on kind of testing out a new model. And a lot of it has to do, I mean, I've seen a lot of talk in the environmental space where this is becoming, you know, something that they're prepared to outsource as long as someone else is taking the risk. And then if a proof of concept is achieved, you know, through the private sector, then they can draw on that. I don't know which departments exactly, but you know, I'm sure that this will be a theme that's coming up more and more.
And the impact, yes, impact funding is definitely the term. It's I referred to it almost like 10 years ago when monitoring evaluation came out. M&E came out. Is M&E? Do you have M&E? What is M&E? And it's almost similar now. Impact funding, impact investment, social impact, and I think it most definitely is relevant, and it's more than just government. As I understand, international as well as local corporates have impact investing in the sense, and Jessica's 100% right, the environmental space seems to be leading the way with regards to impact bonds, especially rhino protection programs, etc., where you can see the return in saving the rhino or the a number of species, for example. But I would recommend it for large nonprofits, at least for now. If you're smaller grassroots nonprofits, the humanitarian side, humanities side of impact investing is still difficult to prove. Whereas from environmental climate change, as well as the animal species and biodiversity, is something easier to track as with regards to impact investing. And I think impact investing can also be a strategy to get climate change or environmental awareness thinking into the corporate boardrooms to kind of influence policy and decisions. But if you're a nonprofit, small nonprofits with feeding schemes and health issues and mental health and that kind of, I would advise that you strongly understand impact investing and understand the term and how it fits with you, but not necessarily that it's a focus of your organization. But if you're a larger nonprofit with a larger gross annual budget, then I would suggest it's more for larger nonprofits, the impact investing specifically. And it's not just government, that's actually what I want to say, it's corporate and government that can impact invest, and individuals.
Yeah, no, listen, I mean, I totally agree, Gita. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think from a corporate perspective, and it's important also to just note from a listed company perspective, it's become an imperative for listed companies to have to report on their ESG investing. So the environmental, social, and what does G stand for? I'm not sure. Environmental, social, corporate governance. So and they have to report on it for you know, public reporting perspective, and they have to you know, really show the societal impact of the investments that they make into society. So it's almost like you follow if you want to kind of follow the money, and then in terms of large corporate and where they're actually spending their money. If the money is spent in line with ESG goals, then they then obviously get endorsements from their own shareholders, and they attract more money, and you know, people you know, it becomes a virtuous cycle that you know, we all kind of following the same investment and societal impact pattern.
And I think so. There's a question here from Azia Adams, I hope I was saying that right, about, so the question is, we would like to get the triple BE skills spend. I am a triple BE specialist and do strategy across sectors, and skills spend will be good for us more than CSI. Do you have any experience shares on that?
No, not with BE, not skills development specifically, no. Definitely more in a CSI perspective. And she's 100% right. The accessing BEE and skills development are two golden nuggets, but you do need you need skilled individuals, and it's quite a specialist approach. And it's something that if there are smaller nonprofits or nonprofits that are on the call, it's an oversight if you're not looking at your triple BEE and how you fit into skills development. So if you've just been focusing on grants and CSI and fundraisers, and you potentially you are a skills development and you can register Casita, etc., or if you're from hospitality or just women empowerment or tech, that's something to look into, as well as the BEE element as well. So that's great, but I'm not a specialist on that process specifically. We would outsource someone like yourself, Asiya.
Jess?
Yeah, look, I mean, I mean, I don't know about skills development. I know that there's, you know, also a very important part that, you know, when clients get measured, when you know, companies get measured from their own BE score, you know, the skills development of their own individuals is something that they are very focused on, and there are companies that actually measure that. But I'm not really entirely sure what the question is in terms of actually what they're looking for. Sorry.
So I think an experience share that I can give is that we have benefited a little bit from the triple BE skills spend, insofar as we've started engaging with larger companies who are looking to invest their triple BE spend on young South African women, so between the ages of 18 and 35, from under-resourced communities and from outlying communities, so not in a city center. And these are all things that we got a BE specialist to kind of decipher for us, and then have a conversation with corporates who we found were aligned with that. And we're busy going through it at the moment. But certainly every time that we get an in-kind donation or, you know, or anything, any kind of donation from a corporate, we will write a letter, give them the certificate, do all these things. And small things make a difference. Like, for example, we have to keep quite a tight register of every single participant's ID number. We need to be able to measure like which area they live, so that we can say which area we're having the greatest impact in. And then ordinary MEL monitoring, evaluation, and learning techniques, like, you know, how much change have we actually been able to create? Has there been a shift in mindset, for example? But I think that I was speaking to some BE consultants a few weeks ago, and they were saying it's such an underlooked sort of way of funding, and that specifically, you know, so you'll have a large corporate who might spend their BE spend on something that's unrelated to their business. So they said there's a great opportunity to bring aligned companies together and really spend that BE money in a way that uplifts the team of the corporate, and also makes sort of a sizable impact. And I guess really exciting when you can start looking at the codes and converting you know, participants into future suppliers, for example. So that's where I think getting a specialist in and deciphering it can get really interesting. It sort of ties in quite well with Yaku's question. Is it best to have a large number of funders that the NPO is aligned with, or is it best to have only a few? What are your thoughts on that?
Jessica, okay, so there are two schools of thought on that. If you look, because I made reference to Laurie Sport for Good earlier, that would be an example of a great corporate non-profit relationship. and there aren't many other corporate funders involved, purely because it shows patronage, it shows affiliation, so it shows a strong relationship. Then you look at the Green Pop model. The Green Pop model has partnership pledges, and it means they've got over 30 many different companies, startups that pledge every product purchase pledges towards the Green Pop. So you plant X amount of trees per this purchase. So it's not, there isn't again a definitive answer to it, but you have to know which direction you are going, because it's resourcing within your nonprofit and way of working. If you are targeting large institutional donors, you need sophisticated grant writing team, people following up with the corporate or with the donor, constantly working with specific people. If you go for the many pledges at smaller amounts because it's awareness, etc., then that's a different resource within your team. So I think it's almost like it's your first investor is a great determines your direction. So if you're a startup and he says they're new nonprofits, you need support. So it would kind of guide maybe which support you do go, but you do have to have the resources for either one. And sometimes a lot of nonprofits do a bit of both, but then your communication has to be clear in who is a stronger affiliation or who just is per event kind of partner, and that does get a bit tricky. But it's kind of, there isn't a right one or a wrong one. It kind of, if you get in the 3 million for 3 years from a large corporate, that's great. But that might then cancel that. You could do smaller events with different businesses on different Saturdays. And I hope that kind of gives some information.
Cool. Jess, any thoughts before we wrap up?
So no, I mean, I just think that, I think we've really covered some really awesome ideas today. I do think that it's not a binary situation, this donor world. I mean, the donor fatigue is absolutely a reality and something we need to be aware of. But there's, I think, a number of different ways to skin this cat, and I think that there are certain ways that we can appeal to people who are willing to donate time, resources, networks, and you're not, and really just to understand the environment, to say, well, how is this world of CSI going to work going forward? And I think it will be slightly different, and I think important to be flexible enough to say that there's value to be gained from a number of different avenues, and it's not just one. So I think really exciting ideas presented today, and hopefully those on the call have got a good way forward for their own organizations.
Awesome, thank you. Gita, any parting thoughts?
Parting thoughts. I think what I want to stress is that within all of this is to never lose your voice as the nonprofits. Sometimes with the donors and the reporting of the big donors or many smaller donors, it's important to keep your voice, because the authenticity will always come out. And if you pretend to do X, Y, Z, in a sense, that kind of will further detach you from a donor or even your stakeholders. So that's almost the last, regardless, and if that doesn't give you money in bank immediately, just be patient. Like, rather be authentic and stick to your guns than change.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And to our two panelists, Gita and Jessica, thank you so much. To everyone who attended today, thank you for giving us your time and your attention. We're going to be doing another event in December and another one in January. So I encourage you to join us for those events. We'll be sharing them on the same platforms, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and through our newsletter. I definitely have got some takeaways from today, a whole lot of different ideas on how to go about diversifying funding and what the new sort of donor landscape and new philanthropy looks like. Some takeaways perhaps on doing a brainstorm on how to pitch. That has come up, one of the questions we weren't able to get to today from Charlotte, but thank you, Charlotte. And yeah, we will catch up soon. Thank you everyone for joining us.
And thanks Kim and Gita. It was great chatting, and I'm so sorry that my tech failed me. So hopefully better luck next time. Apologies for that.
All good. I feel like that's part of what we sign up for. Plan for the tech to fail.
Exactly.
It's gonna happen.
So
thank you very much.
Well, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.